Shabbat Shalom, family and friends. Today's Torah portion is number 34, named Bemidbar, which means in the wilderness. This Torah portion introduces the book of Numbers and covers the first chapter through chapter 4, verse 20. So, what is the wilderness? The wilderness is an unoccupied place, an uncultivated place. It's a difficult place to be in. It's not a place where the average person wants to settle. It's more of a place where you pass to go somewhere else. That not only applies physically, but spiritually, because it's a place where the flesh cries out for relief. A believer is forced to wait on the Lord. Before Jesus started his ministry, after he was baptized, he was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness. Before that, John the Baptist was preaching in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord. So, what's the context for this Torah portion? The children of Israel are in the wilderness. This Torah portion takes place 13 months after the children of Israel were delivered from bondage in Egypt. They received their laws and the covenant from God, and God has taken up residence among them in the sanctuary. They are now at a point where they're ready to go and take possession of the promised land. However, before they do, God asked them to take a census, a count of all able-bodied men over 20 years old. We're actually in the year 2020, where the U.S. is taking a census of the country. A census really helps the government to determine where to deploy government funds to meet the needs of the people. This also includes how many people a representative in Congress should represent. If we serve a God that knows the number of hairs on our heads, wouldn't he know how many people there are? My opinion is that part of the purpose of the census was for Israel to organize itself. As we saw over and over again, reading through Leviticus, God is a God of order, not disorder. It's also in this same Torah portion where camps are assigned where they're going to situate themselves relative to the tabernacle. It's even assigned the order in which these tribes are going to move as they wander through the wilderness. He even outlines who specifically is going to be in charge of moving the artifacts of the tabernacle. So now, God orders them to take a census. Now, in Exodus 30:12, the children are commanded to pay a ransom whenever they take a census of the sons of Israel. So, what is ransom? Ransom is something you pay so that another can be freed from bondage. When I hear that word, I think of money a parent would pay for their kid to be released by the kidnappers so that the kid can rejoin the family and live with them. The ransom for atonement was a half shekel everybody had to pay for atonement. Atonement is what allowed a sinful people to be reconciled with a holy God. So what's interesting is that the second verse of this Torah portion notes that the people should be counted head by head. It's common to use the term head count to refer to when we're counting people. So the Hebrew word used in the term head by head is gugolith, which is also the Hebrew word used for skull. For example, in Judges 9:53, when Abimelech's skull was crushed, the word gogolith was used. The Aramaic version of this word is Golgotha, or some people pronounce it Golgotha. The Latin version of this word is Calva, which is where we get the word Calvary in English. So, whenever there was a counting of the heads or skulls, the children of Israel had to pay a ransom for atonement to be reconciled with God. Well, that final ransom for atonement was paid in full for all of mankind in a place called the place of a skull, Golgotha. This symbolizes that above every head, the ransom for atonement had been paid. Jesus notes in Matthew 20:28 that just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. And where was that? On Calvary, on Golgotha, on the place of the head or skull. Now, there was a grand total count of 603,550 able bodied men. Now, what's incredibly sad to me is that only two of that large amount made it to the promised land, Joshua and Caleb. And by the way, these men that made it to the promised land, one, Joshua, he was a native Israelite from the tribe of Ephraim. The other gentleman, Caleb, he was a Kenizzite that was grafted into the tribe of Judah. Caleb represented Judah, though in Joshua 14:14, he's described as Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite. So he represented Judah, though he was a Kenizzite. He was grafted in. And it's just interesting to note here that out of the two individuals that made it to the promised land, one was a natural born Israelite, the other one was grafted in. Now, going back to this number of men, remember that all of these men, the 603,550 men, they had to at least be 18 years old when the plagues were occurring in Egypt. I mean, they saw God move in powerful ways. They were there when God split the Red Sea. They saw all of this. Yet, you could take them out of Egypt, but you couldn't take Egypt out of them, as we'll learn as we continue to read through Numbers. And that's something that we all need to combat. The men counted, they were warriors. These were not sickly or dying men. They were expected to fight for Israel. And this even speaks to today, where those that serve the Lord continually fight the Egypt that's in ourselves. So, how do we prepare to go into the promised land? Well, let's examine how the tribes of Israel moved. Judah moved first. Judah's name means praise. So when we make Yah praiser, right? Judah Yah. So when we make a move, it should be led by praise. The Levites carried the artifacts of the tabernacle and they were in the middle. The name Levi means joined to, as they were in the center of the camp and guarded the focal point of the camp, which was the tabernacle. All the tribes settled around the Levites, and through the Levites, all the tribes were joined together. The last tribe to go out was Dan. Dan means judgment. Anyone who attacked Israel will be judged by God. So, in summary, praise must lead the way, and the focal point should be the presence of the Lord, and then divine judgment will serve as protection, the rear guard against all the power of darkness. The last thing I wanted to point out was the land that was given to Simeon once they reached the promised land. So before Jacob dies in Genesis 49, when he's giving his blessings to his sons, when he gets to Levi and Simeon, he notes to not let his soul enter their council, to let not his honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man. He curses their anger. Remember that Levi and Simeon took revenge into their own hands after their sister Dinah was defiled. Simeon is the only tribe that Moses does not bless in Deuteronomy 33. So, hundreds of years later, after Jacob dies, the land of Israel is being divided, and Simeon's inheritance was in the midst of the inheritance of Judah. Notice that they are the only tribe that are completely surrounded by another tribe. Joshua 19:19 Joshua 19:9 notes that the land given to Judah was too much for them. Therefore the children of Simeon had their inheritance within the inheritance of Judah. I see this as a foreshadowing of Romans 8:17, where it notes that we are heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, the Lion of Judah. We touched upon the meaning of the names of Judah, Levi, and Dan. Now, this name Simeon means to hear. And this reminds me of Galatians 3:2, where it's questioned, did we not receive the Spirit by the works of the law, or but by the hearing of faith? Many people today are in the wilderness, crying out and waiting on the Lord. So let's recognize that the Lord is with us because Jesus paid that price of ransom for atonement. Thus, as we journey through the wilderness, we must lead the way with praise, focusing on the glory of the Lord who delivered us from bondage. We are joint heirs with Christ and will reach the promised land. So, my brothers and sisters, take courage and be a blessing to others as we enter a new week. Shalom.